Hey everybody, welcome back to Human. I'm Joe Klemczewski with the esteemed Jeffrey Stucke, licensed mental health therapist, in our second episode on anxiety. And Jeff, I think the first one was a pretty solid introduction, but I would like to hear more from you, if possible, on ways we induce anxiety or let it creep in. And I'll give you just a little kind of environmental background from a couple conversations I had today.
Good.
Um, Having lunch with a friend that I don't see that often, but he's a great intellectual being, and we have some pretty deep conversations. And he told me I need to stop watching the news. Like it's just freaking me the fuck out. Like there's just so much going on, and we could list all the things. Um, and I remember Yuval Noah Harari, historian, who is right now on a current hobby horse of saying something similar, like just like food, even if news is not necessarily harmful or bad for you, you're not in some kind of a silo echo chamber getting horrible stuff. It's too much is just too much. Like we can get too much information and ruminating on too much information when you could just be watching the butterflies and thinking your own thoughts and fantasizing about your life and creating things in your mind. Instead, we're just stuck in these information bubbles, and too much is too much. So I think that's kind of a sociological undercurrent right now. Wouldn't you say that everybody has anxiety at a baseline that's higher than before in a lot of ways?
Certainly. The 24-hour news cycle is still a relatively new thing. And the, and then you combine that, with everyone, almost everyone on the planet holding a cell phone and, being able to record things and those things are uploaded, all of those kinds of things, and it's the anxiety is intended to increase my awareness when I move towards the unfamiliar. So the example that I always give is like, when I drive home from work, it's like I'm on autopilot, right? I pull in the driveway, I'm like, holy shit, I'm home already. Versus, at night, driving down a road that I've never driven on before, it's dark, it's rainy, I anxiety emphasizes everything, so I tighten my grip on the steering wheel. I'm focused. I mean, it makes everything seem bigger, right? So that I can perceive it. And so then you think about watching the news through those lenses with the added component of literally nothing that I can control. Like I have no control over any of this. And it so and so those two things, it's just constantly being bombarded with the unfamiliar. This is new, this is new, this is new, this is new. And then there's not a goddamn thing that I control except the off switch. And most people don't don't it and once it, like we talked about last week, right? Agoraphobia, the fear of being afraid, it like becomes a self-sustaining system to where people are like, well, I have to stay informed because what if I don't stay? And it's like, well, there's literally nothing I mean, you can vote, you can, you, control what you can control. And so when you combine those two things together, I mean, humanity has never had this level of exposure to information, period, information in general, but then catastrophic information, it, it's not going well. It is not a good combination for the human condition.
So you and I have both heard of people, friends maybe even, who take a social media fast and they'll just check out, like I'm taking a month off. And then invariably they come back and they get re-addicted to that kind of swell of information. And I'm so prone to this. Every time I make a rule for myself, I break it very quickly. And I'm curious if you, with clients, have made those hard, fast rules. Yes, you can keep up on the news, pick a time of the day and one source or two, and this much time, and that's it. And then leave your phone in the living room when you go to bed. Like all those things that people talk about. Have you any experience in that actually working well?
Some, yes. It's almost it's interesting because it does kind of mimic the pattern of dieting, right? It's like they'll diet
Yeah,
for a little while and then they go on another binge and feel shitty and then they'll go on another diet and it's like and I get it. I mean, it's
that's
designed,
my life with information.
right? That I mean, it just and it the the things that I've had more success with is and we've talked about this in past episodes that you'll text something that you would never say to somebody's face. And oftentimes with couples, like texting is for logistics only or like cutesy emojis. Like it's not a place to try to argue or solve a problem or any of those kinds of things. And so getting couples to adhere to boundaries with that with some success. Um, but in terms of, I think in the DSM-6, like FOMO will be a actual clinical diagnosis. I mean, it's just like, and I don't know what the fuck we're so scared of missing out on, but it's like, but it's that sense of like, well, I just got to know. You got to know what, like the fake images of people's lives that they put, like the one dimension that they post that is like mostly divorced of reality. It's so fascinating how much FOMO social media creates. And
Well,
it's almost like this damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I get anxious if I'm on it, but then I get anxious if I'm not on it.
So I have found what is most successful for me when I'm creating those new boundaries, because I think FOMO is the perfect phrase. Fear of missing out on that information, fear of missing out on that thing that's causing anxiety or that undercurrent of dis-ease. Well, what I'm actually missing out on is my real life. Like I could be creating things. My whole life has been as a creative being. And the more I passively consume information, the less I'm creative and the less I'm creating. And so I find if I replace that time, like from now on, I'm going to turn the TV off at this time and this is my reading time. Like I'm going to do something creative. That gives me something to look forward to instead of just abstaining from something. But there's also a sense, if you go back to kind of the historical things that can cause anxiety, and two that I want to bring up tonight is I'm starting to learn. This is a new tool. It's funny at my age, but I've learned, Jeffrey, that I can control my thoughts. I know that's novel to a therapist, but I promise I never thought I could. In the fact that if I think I'm like gonna start rambling through some emotional baggage and get myself in a mental turmoil, I can just say, "Okay, Joe, switch the channel. You can control your thoughts." This inner Jeff Stucke in my brain takes over, and I say, "I can think of something else." My mind doesn't have to control me. I can, and it works. And I'll start thinking of something else, and I've kind of freed myself of that anchor. And I found my wife doing this more tangibly, where if I start telling her something, she'll be like, "Just stop, stop. I don't want to think about that right now. Just stop, 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 stop." I'm like, "Okay." Like that's her way of saying I just don't want that in my head right now. It's not the right time. And I'm like, that's pretty mature actually.
Well, and I do think it a couple of things. We talked about last week the negativity bias and confirmation bias, right? And so that's something that that catastrophic information can activate. It's like, well, I need more of it. I have to know more of it. Like I have to know all of the catastrophic things that are so there. I don't want to undersell like just our primitive hardwiring for that. and how the 24-hour news cycle is fully intended to tap into that because it keeps us locked in, right? The old saying that if it bleeds, it leads. And it's like, it's that sort of things. If it's dangerous, I have to I have to understand it, and then I have to understand all of the ways that it could be dangerous, which is that negativity bias and confirmation bias. Once that gets activated, that's a powerful force, right? It's a very powerful force. I also think I would encourage people, and what I tell my clients is like, it's junk calories, man. It's whether you want to talk about, physical calories or psychological calories, it's the same thing, man. If you eat a bunch of shitty calories, you're going to feel like shit. And if you just watch a bunch of this negative stuff and it's going to, and it collapses on itself, right? It's like, once I've eaten five Oreos, it's like, fuck it, I might as well eat this and a gallon of ice cream and everything else. And our consumption of junk psychological calories, and the amount of effort that it requires to reset the system. And, and I have to remind myself, like, okay, I cannot watch the news. Any news that I take in, I read. I don't need the screaming at me. That's not useful for me. So it's like, one of the things that I've learned is like, I have a few different sources that I rely on that kind of read those different sources and take in the information and try to figure out, anything relevant. But fuck, with AI, who knows what? I mean, we may be in the matrix right now. I don't freaking know.
I literally think with what's happening in the world right now, especially the deeper I get into AI, the more I realize this really literally could be a simulation. Because of what AI can do right now, that's this topic for another day. But I think it's more realistic than ever.
I mean, it absolutely is. To where, anyway, that is a topic for another day.
Right.
Um, and then it comes down to quality of life. What quality of life do you want to have? And it's like, you know, remember you have to die. I mean, we have a finite amount of time. Do I want to, how much of the finite hours of my life do I want to devote to being angry or being afraid? Not a lot. I just don't want to do that. Like, to your point, I'm happier when I'm creating relationship, creating content, whatever that is, but being creative. And I want to be creative up until my very last breath. And that's, we're one of the US particularly now, and whoever the fuck that guy is that's trying to, whatever his age is, what is he, 15 now or what?
Oh, Brian Johnson?
Oh, he's the guy that the DMT guy that we just got that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, dude, you're gonna die, whatever. But
Yeah, he doesn't think so.
with your 60 pills that you take every whatever, but I do think one of the things that I have to use to regulate these kinds of things in my own life is what quality of life do I want? I want a good one. I have amazing children. And do I want to sit and be terrified about the world that they're living in that could pretend, and it's like I can go there, man. I can get myself into a very dark place and like, what was I thinking when I even had children and what kind of world am I And it's like, what good is that going to do versus and it social creation is what the social fabric needs right now. Being kind, like saying hello. Like, when I get on the elevator, it's like I have a choice every time. Do I just put my head down and ride the elevator down, or do I say hello? Those kinds of things. And I would rather, because I know I am going to die, it's inescapable. I have made very intentional choices about how I want to live. And I'm going to guard that. And it, it, I just, what good does it do? And you've met these people that are just, they're on their 24-hour news cycle every day, and you can't fucking have a conversation with them about anything. I mean, it's just, everything, they're a hammer and everything is a nail. And it's like, is that how you want to live your life? No, that's not how I want to live my life. Do I want to look at people through the lenses of hatred or being terrified? No, I don't want to do that. I want to look at I want to look at humanity. I want to look at life through the brightest lenses that I possibly can. So I'm going to preserve that.
So speaking of death, Irving Yalom,
Mhm.
he says in his 50 or so 60 years of psychiatry, he says he thinks the most correlative part of anxiety is if somebody perceives that their life was well lived or if they have regrets. So here is the other side of the FOMO coin. We don't want to necessarily have fear. In the Buddhist philosophy, we don't want to cling to everything and we don't want all of these tight attachments that make us cling to things. So let go of that. But you also, as you just described, have to have some kind of intent and be okay with the life you're living. I too, Jeff, for a long, long time, which is kind of weird, but maybe not, have thought about how I want to die. Where do I want to be mentally, like in my self made creation of my life, my humanity? How do I want to leave this existence? And very much like Irving is describing, if you live with that as a guideline somewhere, if you visit that from time to time, then you're gonna probably have less regrets because you're doing the things you are intending to do. And those are the people, he said, who don't have death anxiety and therefore have less general anxiety. So it's kind of another issue or that other side of the coin of FOMO. But how does that resonate with you?
Uh, Loudly. And, in my evangelical days, there was a profound amount of anxiety, right? Of, did I say the sinner's prayer right? And it's like, I'm supposed to be sealed by the Holy Spirit, but I still mostly a shitty person and think about like some pretty unconscionable thing. Like I don't know how to activate this Holy Spirit and like why and and so living life, right? And I was as a Dallas Theological Seminary alum, I was a 5-point Calvinist, man. I was guaranteed. We were like once saved, always saved. I had every base covered. We were like, we were pre-tribulation rapture. Like we get out of here before shit goes bad. But all of that was still anxiety inducing for me. And what's interesting was the quote. It's a it's adapted from one of Marcus Aurelius's entries in Meditations. The short version of it is death smiles at us all we can do is smile back. And that has just become a source of comfort. Like it it is coming for me, not in a morbid sense. It just is factually true that death is coming for me. I will live my life in the reality of that. And my hope is that when it comes for me, I can smile and welcome it as much as I would any other part of life. And as you know, I think I got tested in my first ayahuasca
Mm.
experience in Peru because death came for me in my ayahuasca ceremony. And I cowered at first, but I rallied, man. I rallied and I smiled back. And I don't know if you've heard of the artist Steven Wilson Jr. He's interesting guy, very interesting. And I don't know how to assess him. He's getting some uh, probably country music is his closest base, but it's nothing. It's it's kind of a throwback to old country, but modern kind of. Anyway, none of that really matters. But his father died, I think, 2 years ago, and had a profound impact on him. And oddly, he was in a on a podcast with Theo Vaughn,
Mm.
um, and he was talking about, it gets me choked up thinking about it, how when his father was passing, the only thing that he was doing was comforting his son. You're good, buddy. Everything's going to be fine. You are, you have nothing to worry about. I'm fine. And it's like
Wow.
that kind of upped the ante for me of, yeah, when my time comes, I want to give comfort. I don't want to be like needing comfort. I want to be in a place where I've lived my life as well as I could live it. And I want to look at my kids with fulfillment and love. And I want to be able to say everything's going to be okay.
Do you know? So I have a metal engraved bookmark somebody gave me as a gift because I told them it was a favorite quote of mine. The quote is, "Live wonderfully or die quickly." And I too, again, I don't know why I have these thoughts other than the fact that we all have death anxiety, even if it's just in the background. It's incessantly there in your subconscious, whether you are aware or not. But I too have thought, I want to die well so that those around me can see from that, can gain something of value because I have been in the presence of loved ones dying where they are tortured and terrified. And there is nothing about that that is less than haunting. Like it's just that kind of pain. And then you walk out of that room just like, thank goodness she's out of pain, or thank good, like instead of celebrating that life, you're just there's pity and anguish. So anyway, I we're going to talk about death anxiety in its full context in our final episode because again it is so profound and pervasive in all forms of anxiety. But
Yeah.
this particular friend I was having lunch with today, as he was describing the anxiety he was feeling, he is even somebody of means who can make some decisions. And in the current political and financial and business climate, he's thinking, I don't know if I should just take all of my money and buy land. Should I buy food? Should I build a bunker? And he said, every time I think of these things, which are probably improbable, right? Like, who wants to spend all of your money on a bunker and then nothing ever happens for the next 40 years? So there's that part of anxiety that is over calculating the probability, but then there's also just that terror of uncertainty of just like imagine if you were worried about those things all the time and nothing ever did happen for the next 40 years and you could have been living a great life, carefree, enjoying, creating, doing your thing. Like I don't think we have a choice if we want to live our best lives other than to block most of that out. Like you said, some of it's there for evolutionarily important reasons, like be on your guard, be wary, save for a rainy day. Don't be completely oblivious to reason and logic. But sometimes you just have to intentionally pretend a certain level of magical thinking is okay. And as a therapist, I wonder how you would handle that juxtaposition that pathologically magical thinking bad, but we probably need some of this in our lives to just get out of the rat race.
Well, the clinical term is delusional disorder, right? And a delusional disorder is defined as a non-bizarre false belief. Psychosis is a bizarre false belief, right? I can heal people, I can fly. A delusional disorder is something that could be true, but just isn't. And so you think about a constructive delusional disorder is, my wife is perfect. She's the most wonderful, beautiful human being that has ever lived, and I am so lucky to be very useful delusional disorder. Um, and there are certain brands of disorders that are delusional disorders that are non, but most people are not going to encounter those. But to your point, like, yeah, those kinds of things. And I tell you what, Joe, after I watched the movie The Book of Eli,
Mm,
I'm not
that's an
prepared.
oldie.
I'm not prepared for life outside the bunker.
Right.
Like, I don't, Mad Max and like that and Waterworld and all that shit where it's like this post-apocalyptic, like my survival skills are just not up to par.
So
Like,
I did tell my friend because he that was one of his things. Should I just buy ammo? And I said, make sure you save the last bullet for yourself because the world may not be what you wanted to live in if all this kind of shit goes down.
I mean, it's just like it just, yeah, I guess that survival, whatever. It just, what good is it to think about those kinds of things? But to your point, yes, delusional disorders can be very destructive or constructive. And, certain delusional disorders, I'm probably step on some toes, but a belief in heaven, right? Now, don't know. There's no objective evidence of an afterlife. But for many people, that belief, and they would call it faith, which is fine. I'm not trying to tread on anybody's belief. I'm just trying to make an objective statement about just for the human race, a belief in the afterlife technically is a delusional disorder because we just don't have any objective evidence. Now, somebody can believe it as much as they want to believe it, and that's fine, and you can see the benefit of, one of the parents who have lost a child. I would fucking have belief in the afterlife too.
Exactly. And yeah, that's the caveat where you think, how can I not in that case, in those small range of cases, how can you not perpetuate that even if you don't believe it? Like that's the tripwire for me.
Oh yeah, I stood next to a woman who her adolescent son OD'd on fentanyl, and when standing there with her in that moment, and she's asking me, "Is there a heaven?" And I'm just saying, I sure hope so. I hope there is, and I hope you and your son have an eternity together. And
You
with
can
fiber of my being for her,
yeah,
I hope that, and still do.
you you can see exactly why that is pervasive in every single part of our humanity, every
What the hell
culture.
else are you gonna say, right?
Right, right. So I'm gonna have to backtrack on a long held mantra, and I'm gonna see how it hits you.
Okay.
Maybe because I'm just rebellious, but I've always hated the concept of balance, like have a balanced life, because there is to me, I've lived my life as in, okay, this is a time I've got to live 100% toward this orientation for this goal. And then at some point I can curve over here and I can do this. But the spoils don't go to somebody who just sits on a rock and tries to achieve balance. However, semantics aside, everything we seem to talk about, it comes down to yes, but, yes, but. And we're showing the edges. This is an extreme to the left, this is an extreme to the right. Whether it's a 50% perfect balance that we're seeking or not, those extremes are harmful. And there is a concept in Buddhism called the middle way. It's a core tenet. And it's just to avoid those extremes. Like, don't take such a dogmatic perspective for your own life or for the lives you think other people should be living and hold them to an extreme dogma. Leave room for some movement, at least toward the middle. So, how do you explain that concept to people of just balance?
It is absolutely to be aspired for. It is a great rule of thumb. It preaches much better than it practices. And there are certain certain things in life that just aren't are not conducive to balance. And the number of, one case in point would be physicians. And, physicians' lives are just out of balance. It
Mm.
just fucking is, man. And, so when I work with a physician or a
And
physician,
that's why they have high suicide rates, by the way.
well, that could be, yes, that is it. Yeah, yeah. Um, well, but some of that, Joe, interestingly, is it used to be that how long you could stay awake as a physician was a badge of honor, and a lot of that came out of, when you have World War I, you have World War II, those kinds of things. And then that kind of, the what it took to be a physician during those times to preserve humanity, kind of bled into the culture after that. And the out of balance was much more tolerated than it is now. But one of the things that compounds now is that you have these kids who go to med school and they incur a $500,000 worth of, student loan debt. And then they're like, fuck, then the only way that there's only one profession that I can service this amount of debt with, and that's being a physician, and I don't want to be a physician. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't, it's complicated. It's very complicated. But with a couple where there is a physician, it's like, in a, male or female, it doesn't matter which direction it goes, but you knew who they were when you married them. And you can continue to, again, I'm not saying abandon the rule of thumb of balance, but you also have to temper it with realistic expectations. I mean, they have call, they have, those kinds of things. And it's like, are you going to be resentful and bitter about that? Or are you going to be supportive of them in who they are and who you knew them to be? And to your point, if you're going to achieve some level of success, for me, starting a private practice, that's fucking, it's horrible. I mean, starting something from nothing requires every resource that you have. And it's like, you get a client that finally calls and they're like, well, the only time I can meet is at 1 a.m. And I'm like, well, I guess we're meeting at 1 a.m. That's you have to accommodate a lot of things just to get to a point of where it's sustaining. And then you get the benefits of that. And you can't get there with balance. I mean, you can't get there. You can go find another job. I can go join a group practice and I can, work for them and I can get referrals from insurance companies and, I can do that sort of thing. But I'm going to be working a lot more. If I commit to that phase of being out of balance, it will afford me more privileges once I get on the other side of that. And so even our expectations have to be in balance.
And that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask in terms of kind of a state or trait question. You at one time, long time ago, said, I, Jeff Stuckey, am a narcissist. And in a private conversation, I said, am I? And you said, no, you have some of the traits which can be useful for people, in terms of leadership and achievement, but you're not a narcissist. And I've heard other people through some kind of funny, entertaining self-awareness to say I'm a narcissist because I need to be the center of attention. I need it to be all about me. And I would give them credit for saying that. But do you think that there are some people with personality traits that are a little needier that then are more prone to anxiety because of that sense of attachment? I'm so attached to ego. I'm so attached to how I'm perceived. I'm so attached to having the impact I want to have that if anything is counter to that, I feel less than.
Yes, and the distinction that we would make is, as it relates to that, would be external locus of control versus internal locus of control. External locus control is I need this to happen externally, right? I need people to like me. I need this event to happen, those sorts of things. So the my internal state of being dictated by my external circumstances is significantly more prone to anxiety. And internal locus of control, I know who I am. I My life is dictated and managed by my values. I am the same person in every circumstance that I engage in. An external situation is just that, an external situation. And now I deal with that situation because I have the internal trust that whatever external event happens, I can respond to that event. I don't need it to go a certain way. I can I can navigate whatever that is, whether it is, you know, it, something at work, financial stress, relational stress, whatever that is. I I can handle that relational stress, where the person that has more of an external locus of control, external circumstances tell them who they are.
Do
They're much more prone to anxiety, yes.
And that's an incredible explanation. I'm glad I asked. Do you feel like you personally have evolved in that way, so it's a healthier version of that trait?
Oh, absolutely. Narcissism is an interesting one of the interesting personality disorders, in that narcissistic tendencies are actually constructive. Narcissist of thinking, somebody thinking, I think I can do that. I think I can pull that off. I think I can solve that problem. I think this is a great idea. So narcissistic tendencies actually are necessary to keep bumping things forward. Now, when it becomes full-blown narcissism, obviously we can see the limitations of full-blown narcissism, but when you're just within the realm of those tendencies, they're necessary and constructive, whereas the other, what we call cluster B personality disorders, none of them have utility. The only one that has the utility is the narcissistic tendencies, which to be able to think like I can pull this off.
So another point in the conversation I was having with my friend at lunch today, I proposed my theory that what religious people sometimes call a born again experience or something that's just a profound shift in a worldview. Like 1 minute ago, I was this person, and then after this experience, I am something new. I have forged that in myself a time or two in the form of neuroplasticity. We've talked about that a little bit with anxiety last time, and also struggling with worldviews like you've talked about your history as an evangelical, mine starting out as a Catholic, becoming an evangelical, becoming a very liberal, theologically oriented person, somebody hanging on by my fingertips, and then, finally letting go. And all of that took a lot of time and pain and anxiety because, again, I was clinging to something. I was clinging to an identity. I was clinging to something I thought might be true, should be true. I want to be true. and then empirically finding out it's just not falsifiable, and how do I reconcile that? But every one of those shifts, Irving Yalom would call them an awakening experience. And that can be profound. But you can go from being somebody who suffers ridiculously from something like anxiety to, at some point in that process, it may take some great talk therapy, it may take something else in your life, some form of neuroplasticity that you're engaging in long term. But at some point, that switch flips, and you now have the freedom to let go at least of more of your ego than you anticipated. And now you have a freer life. And my theory to my friend was, when you've done this a couple times and you realize it's possible and you realize it's profound and it's necessary, I think you can do it more easily and more gradually and more subtly and more consistently, and that it becomes a letting go of things as you go. Like, imagine floating down the river in a canoe and you decide, well, I don't need this and I don't need that. And by the time you get to your destination, you have only the things you really need. And it wasn't a catastrophic seizure of anxiety and throwing things overboard. It was just deciding along the way, this no longer serves me. And I feel like in my fourth quarter of life, like, I can see the finish line. I can look back and I can see what's behind me, the things I liked about my life and what I didn't. And I have a better view of how to hold on to what I want to hold on to and how to let go of what I don't need. And I feel like that's kind of Yalom's point, but aspirationally making them small changes instead of profound, life shattering awakenings.
Yeah. What quarter am I in?
You may be in the first. Like, you might be Brian. You could live to be 175, I think.
I don't need that shit. God, that's like stressful. Yeah, and I will tell you that one of the things I think I brought this up last week or one of our discussions, the gift of the primitive rite of passage was putting kind of the pre-adolescent, adolescent male through like hell,
Mm.
like fucking hell. And then coming out on the other side of that, where like, shit, what could be worse than that? And again, the more that I have studied and researched that, it's like that's the greatest gift that you can give an adolescent boy. Like, of course, our modern society would interrupt the primitive rite of passage, put that child in protective custody and therapy group, and deprive them of that gift. And I have you and I talked about McConaughey's book, Green Light?
Yes, yes.
And it the thing that was so interesting about McConaughey to me was the chaos of his life, right? But there was also, what does he call it? Cowboy wisdom or something like that. There was always a sense of more fear of not trying something than trying something. And that was kind of one of an epiphany for me in reading that book, which I was kind of resistant to initially, but once I finally read it, I was really grateful because he's done his work. It's a remarkable book, and kind of the fancy term that we use to discuss this is systematic desensitization, right? And usually systematic desensitization applies to phobias, right? So if you have some sort of a phobia that's interfering with your ability to function, then I'm going to introduce you to it to stressful but not overwhelming morsels at a time until you overcome it. And that tracks on anything. And I try to practice that as much as I can. I, since I've lived in Chicago, I did an improv class at Second City. I did stand up. I'm, you know, doing a couple of things this year, venturing into pickleball territory. Are you there yet?
Yeah, yes,
Man, you're already
absolutely.
there. Okay, so I'll be joining the pickleball cult soon.
So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a lifelong athlete, and if I'm not jumping, running, sprinting, doing high level plyometric exercises and stuff, I may as well be dead. That's when you'll know the end is near. So anyway, yes, Tracy and I got involved last year, and it's just perfect for old people, right? Because it's like tennis on a smaller court. You don't have to tear your ACL chasing a ball. But let me go back for a second to what you were describing there, because I feel like we can take a turn and at least make this the segue toward our final conversation next week on death anxiety. And it is what John Vervaeke would call meaning making. And I'm gonna give some information that people should write down. But what you're describing with McConaughey is this. It was very intentional from his father. He wanted to instill that fatherly grit. And there's a saying I'm going to remember his name here. Something Bader. Anyway, maybe I'm getting this wrong. The father, the founder of Boy Scouts, was from the UK. He started this 150 or so years ago, and his leading vocalization of why this organization needs to exist is to teach fathers, specifically in engendering this to their sons, never do for a boy what a boy can do for himself. Never do for a boy what a boy can do for himself. And it gives that tone of you're pushing them to the edge. You're pushing them to the edge. You're there to catch them if they fall, but let them fall. Let them fall into your arms, but let them try. And I've loved that to the point where even something as innocuous as my 5-year-old grandson, he loves putting together Legos. And the way it started was he loved it for a second. And then when it got too hard, it's just, you do it, just build it for me. And I show him the instructions, and I swear he's more mechanically inclined than I am, because I can look at these instructions. I'm having to count pegs, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I don't, do I have this in the right spot? He can just visually look at it, pick the right piece, and put it in the exact right spot instantly. And I'm like, you little motherfucker! Like, you're better at this than I am. But again, I have to hold his attention to it, and I have to physically make him like put, and he loves it, but the attention span, he just needs that nudge back into the game. So anyway, something that small. I consider it, have you ever watched the John Vervaeke 50-part lecture on meaning making?
No, I have absolutely not.
It is the most important thing on the internet you could ever consume.
All right, putting it in right now.
Psychology professor and former colleague of Jordan Peterson, who has come back to reconcile with Peterson. And basically, you can see in this relationship, even though you've lost your fucking mind, Jordan Peterson, I still care for you, and I feel like you have worth and you have value the world needs. So he's come back to embrace Peterson and engage in some podcasts with him. But Vervaeke himself, you can see this is where Peterson got all of his energy for doing what he's done. It all came from John Vervaeke. He's one of the most brilliant people on the planet. He has a 50-part series on YouTube that is now a book, 2 volumes of his book. And he starts at the early Greek philosophers. And he comes all the way full circle to today and says, here is how the human mind, philosophy, religion, etc., evolved. Critical thinking through the Enlightenment. And it's the most incredible historical record you'll ever hear. I have listened to that entire 50-part series almost 3 times in its entirety.
Jesus, okay.
And I've got the first volume of the book. The second one's not out yet. It's just profound. It's just profound. So the basic tenet is our brains are meaning making machines. And if we're not satisfied with the meaning we find in life, we're going to try to create it in some other ways, pathological or not. And until we get to that final settled place, coming back to Buddhist philosophy, where we're okay. We no longer have to cling. That story of the father dying, the father taking his last breaths and comforting his son, that's a person who has found meaning in life and is okay leaving life behind. I don't know if we're not on that trajectory, if we can ever be anxiety free. Like,
And I think that parallels, hang with me, because it a lot of anxiety is, the old adage, a good dog is a tired dog. And when you leave a dog in the kennel too long, it becomes pathologically anxious, to the point that it does start to engage in self-harm. Like it'll start to gnaw itself, right? It'll just to have some other experience than that anxiety that it cannot run out. I think a significant amount of our anxiety is that
mm,
people are overly kenneled. They're they're not pursuing their own meaning. They're doing the opposite of what you're saying, and they're not doing the exhaustive work, whether it's physical or mental, fatigue of like a good dog is a tired dog. And I do think a significant amount of the anxiety it comes from the fact that we just say it's pathological, but then we also never look at it from the perspective of untapped potential, untapped, just mental or physical exhaustion. And I think that's exactly right. I think those are two sides of the same coin.
yeah, I say that often that but I've never had that phrase. I'm going to write that one down. A good dog is a tired dog because I am my own worst enemy if I'm not um, keeping myself busy enough. 100%.
Bro,
So here is my prompt, Jeff, and it's a little bit unintended because my last point provoked it. I would love everybody to look up John Vervaeke on YouTube and Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is the thing. And I'm telling you, it'll be the best 50 hours you ever spent. But I know, Jeff, how methodical you are. Um, don't feel like you have to sit down with a pen and paper and listen to the first one 15 times before you go on to the second one. Like I painted my entire upstairs and refloored my entire house. I took an entire summer, and that was the first 50 hours with John Vervaeke, was listening to that the entire. I didn't. I had a paintbrush or a hammer in my hand. I couldn't write anything down. I just had to let it wash over me. And the thought the whole time was, I got to do this again. Like I got to read it. I got to do this so I can focus even more. And it's inexhaustible, like the wisdom that he brings to it. But even if you just listen to one of these, pick out episode number 34 if you want, and just listen to this guy teach philosophy of mind from that perspective, awakening from the meaning crisis. Because his thesis is we are in that post enlightenment phase of collective human consciousness where we don't have the right answers, but we've left the wrong answers behind, and we're all seeking something, and it's not unified enough to give us a cohesive society. And so he's like, we got to decide on something soon. And why don't you start with yourself? Awaken from the meaning crisis, find some kind of meaning and enjoy it. Settle into it and coast off into the rest of your life, settled on the fact that you found the meaning that you need. So that's my prompt. Go listen to one episode of Awaken from the Meaning Crisis, John Vervaeke.
okay. Mine's a little corny, so I apologize. But I'm going to go ahead and utilize it anyway. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And try to start leaning towards your fears. Like don't let fear restricts, right? It constricts and it restricts. And it's like rather than continuing to let fear, rather than thinking that anxiety is only pathological and I should shrink, start leaning. into that. If you if you have some sort of general anxiety disorder, like rather than like, okay, I'm just going to let myself feel this versus the constriction of holy shit, I'm starting to get anxious again. Like it these are you said something earlier about learning that you can control your thoughts, and it requires a fuck ton of energy. When I'm at wit's end, I have to talk out loud to myself. I can't fight that battle in my mind or I'll lose it. And it's like, rather than am I getting am I getting anxious? It's just like I'm just getting anxious. Like I'm just getting anxious. And little, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It starts with cognition. Like those little cognitive adjustments. It's just anxiety. If a person will take that seriously, it'll set them free. But when it becomes this pathological thing to be afraid of, the fear should be feared, then you're in that loop that you can't get out of. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
I love it. That's the one that'll stick for obvious reasons. Thank you, Jeff Stuckey. We will see you guys next time in Human for episode 3, the final chapter in anxiety. Not going to want to miss that one.